Greetings and salutations, comrades. Hope this finds you well. Quick shout out to the 2 Uber comrades supporting this channel, my content on Patreon, my partner. Thank you, Rosa, and Independent Left News. They're a great resource. Definitely check them out. My kiddo wants a shout out. I'll give them a shout out. They're cool. I love them a lot, but they're not an Uber comrade, so they're not getting an Uber comrade shout out. So I wanted to go over this article from Albert Einstein, the brilliant physicist, scientist that he was, titled Why Socialism? This came out, I believe, in the first edition of the monthly review. I think it's one of the longest running socialist magazines in the United States, if not the longest. And I think this maybe appeared in their first issue or shortly after. So I just wanted to share this with you. He can make some really strong cases of why socialism. And again, I would say, obviously, socialism is the lowest stage of communism. And then we have, socialism, a dictatorship of the proletariat, and we, build up the, conditions so we're able to have a communist society, meaning a classless and stateless society. So here's Einstein. Albert Einstein is the world famous physicist. The article was originally published in the first issue, I was right, May 1949. It was subsequently republished in May 1998 to commemorate the first issue of MR's 50th year. So they've been doing good work for quite a while. Look at that. They have stuff about Mao, slow-mo aesthetics, profits of the permanent war economy, capitalism in Wonderland, Marxism in the U.S., all kinds of good stuff. So I highly recommend, checking out monthly review. You can, look out some of their articles, but you can obviously, also subscribe to, their print issue. So here we go. Mr. Albert Einstein on why socialism. Is it advisable for one who's not an expert on economic and social issues to express views on the subject of socialism? I believe for a number of reasons that it is. I agree completely. I think it would be very, elitist to say, no, you got to have a, master's or PhD in economics, or political science to be able to talk about the failures of capitalism. No, like, people inherently know that capitalism is a very messed up system that puts the needs of profit above the needs of people, above the needs of the planet. It's very problematic. And, the contradictions of capitalism, the longer it goes on, whether in the United States or abroad, those contradictions get worse and worse. People's material conditions get worse and worse, and they realize, we could probably be doing a lot better. So agree with Einstein on that point. Let us first consider the question from the point of view of scientific knowledge. It might appear that there are no essential methodological differences between astronomy and economics. Scientists in both fields attempt to discover laws of general acceptability for a circumscribed group of phenomena in order to make the interconnection of these phenomena as clearly understandable as possible. But in reality, such methodological, say that 5 times fast, differences do exist. The discovery of general laws in the field of economics is made difficult by the circumstances that observed economic phenomenon are often affected by many factors, which are very hard to evaluate separately. In addition, the experience which has accumulated since the beginning of the so-called civilized period of human history has, as is well known, been largely influenced and limited by causes which are by no means exclusively economic in nature. For example, most of the major states of history owed their existence to conquest. The conquering peoples established themselves legally and economically as the privileged class of the conquered country. They seized for themselves a monopoly of the land ownership and appointed a priesthood from among their own ranks. The priests in control of education made the class division of society into a permanent institution and created a system of values by which the people were thenceforth to a large extent unconsciously guided in their social behavior. But historic tradition is, so to speak, of yesterday. Nowhere have we really overcome that thirst what Thorsten Veblen called the predatory phase of human development. I would definitely say that's still very true, especially in the United States. The observable economic facts belong to the phase, and even such laws that we can derive from them are not applicable to other phases. Since the real purpose of socialism is precisely to overcome and, yes, advance beyond the predatory phase of human development, economic science in its present state can throw little light on the socialist society of the future. Second, socialism is directed towards a socialist ethical end. Science, however, cannot create ends, and even less instill them in human beings. Science at most can supply the means by which to attain certain ends, but the ends themselves are conceived by personalities with lofty ethical ideals, and if these ends are not stillborn but vital and vigorous, are adopted and carried forward by those many human beings who have consciously determine the slow evolution of society. For these reasons, we should be on our guard to not overestimate science and scientific methods when it is a question of human problems. And we should not assume that experts are the only ones who have a right to express themselves on questions affecting the organization of society. Completely and utterly agree with that. You don't need to be an expert on something to express opinion on it, especially about the horrors of capitalism, because the working class in the United States are affected by the horrors of capitalism on a daily basis, whether it's having lack of access to healthcare, education, housing, livable wage, etc., etc. So that would be obviously a very elitist and ridiculous position to have, that only experts can weigh in on matters that affect everybody, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized. Innumerable voices have been asserting for some time now that human society is passing through a crisis, that its stability has been gravely shattered. Like I say all the time, capitalism is a real virus. It is characteristic of such a situation that individuals feel different or even hostile toward the group, small or large, to which they belong. In order to illustrate my meaning, let me record here a personal experience. I recently discussed with an intelligent and well-disposed man the threat of another war. Again, this was written in 1949 by Albert Einstein, which in my opinion would seriously endanger the existence of mankind, and remarked that only a supranational organization could offer protection from that danger. Thereupon my visitor very calmly and coolly said to me, quote, "Why are you so deeply opposed to the disappearance of the human race?" I am sure that as little as a century ago, no one would have so lightly made a statement of this kind. It's a pretty deeply disturbing statement. Why would we want the human race to disappear? We should be doing everything to prevent that from happening. And one of those things would obviously be throwing off the shackles of capitalism, instituting socialism, and working towards communism, a classless and stateless society. It is the statement of a man who has striven in vain to attain an equilibrium within himself and has more or less lost hope of succeeding. It is the expression of a painful solitude and isolation from which so many people are suffering in these days. What is the cause? Is there a way out? It is easy to raise such questions, but difficult to answer them with any degree of assurance. I must try, however, as best I can, although I'm very conscious of the fact that our feelings and strivings are often contradictory and obscure, and they cannot be expressed in easy and simple formulas. And again, that's the whole point of having kind of a Marxist Leninist approach, is you try to work through those contradictions as much as possible. Even in a socialist society, contradictions would still exist. You would want to try to lessen them and figure out how to minimize them as much as possible, right? Man is at one and the same time a solitary being and a social being. As a solitary being, he attempts to protect his own existence, and that of those who are closest to him, to satisfy his personal desires and to develop his innate abilities. As a social being, he seeks to gain the recognition and affection of his human beings, to share in their genuine pleasures, to comfort them in their sorrows, and to improve their conditions of life. So that's that contradiction of being a human. We like our solitude, our space, but we're also social beings. But that is something that capitalism, especially in the United States version, really highlights that individualistic nature. Pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. If you fail, it's your fault. Only look out for yourself. And obviously, socialism throws that equation on its head, right? Let's see. Only the existence of these very frequently conflicting, as they're saying, striving accounts for the special character of a man, and their specific combination determines the extent to which an individual can achieve an inner equilibrium and contribute to the well-being of society. It is quite possible that the relative strengths of these two drives is in the main fixed by inheritance, but the personality that finally emerges is largely formed by the environment in which a man happens to find himself during his development, by the structure of society which he grows up, again, which is what that's a very Marxist thing to say, is that material conditions affect the person. It's not the person who impacts the material conditions, right? The abstract concept of society means to the individual human being the sum total of his direct and indirect relations to his contemporaries and to all the people of earlier generations. The individual is able to think, feel, strive, and work by himself, but he depends so much upon society in his physical, intellectual, and emotional existence that it is impossible to think of him or to understand him outside the framework of society. Completely agree. It is society which provides man with food, clothing, and a home, the tools for work, language, the forms of thought, and the most of the content of thought. His life is made possible through the labor and accomplishments of the many millions past and present who are hidden behind the word society. But again, these are all things that are not guaranteed to somebody in a capitalist society. In the United States, we have, tens of millions of people who are food insecure, including children. We have 500 plus thousands, probably more, people who are homeless. Even though we have millions, literally millions of homes that sit unoccupied. Right? It is evident, therefore, that the dependence of the individual upon society is a fact of nature which cannot be abolished, just as in the case of ants and bees. However, while the whole life process of ants and bees and fixed down in the smallest detail by rigid hereditary instincts, the social pattern and interrelationships of human beings are very variable and susceptible to change. Memory, the capacity to make new combinations, the gift of oral communication have made possible developments among human being, which are not dictated by biological necessities. Such developments manifest themselves in traditions, institutions, and organizations, in literature, in scientific and engineering accomplishments, and the works of art. This explains how it happens that, in a certain sense, a man can influence his life through his own conduct, and that in this process, conscious thinking and wanting can play a part. Man acquires at birth through hereditary a biological constitution, which we must consider fixed and unalterable, including the natural urges which are characteristic of the human species. Drink water. In addition, during his lifetime, he acquires a cultural constitution, which he adopts from society through communication and through many types of influences. It is this cultural constitution, with the passages of time, is subject to change, and which determines to a very large extent the relationship between individual and society. Modern anthropology has taught us through comparative investigation of so-called primitive cultures that the social behavior of human beings may differ greatly depending on prevailing cultural patterns and types of organizations which predominate in society. Totally true, right? It is on this that those who are striving to improve the lot of men may ground their hopes. Human beings are not condemned because of the biological constitution to annihilate each other or to be at the mercy of a cruel, self-inflicted fate. Agreed. If we ask ourselves how the structure of society and the cultural attitudes of man should be changed in order to make human life as satisfying as possible, we should constantly be conscious of the fact that there are certain conditions in which we are unable to modify. As mentioned before, the biological nature of man, for all practical purposes, is not subject to change. Furthermore, technological and demographic developments the last few centuries have created conditions which are here to stay. Relatively densely settled populations with the goods which are indispensable to the continued existence, an extreme division of labor, and a highly centralized productive apparatus are absolutely necessary. A time which, looking back, seems so idyllic is gone forever, when individuals or relatively small groups could be completely self-sufficient. It's only a slight exaggeration to say that mankind constitutes even now a planetary community of production and consumption. I've now reached the point where I may indicate briefly to me what constitutes the essence of the crisis of our time. Here we go. It concerns the relationships of the individual to society. The individual has become more conscious than ever of his dependence on society, but he does not experience this dependence as a positive asset, as an organic tie, as a productive force, but rather as a threat to his natural rights or even to his economic existence. Moreover, his position in society is such that the egotistical drives of his makeup are constantly being extenuated with his social drives, which are by nature weaker, progressively deteriorate. So it's kind of something I was talking about earlier. Capitalism, especially the version that we have in the United States. It's all about me, me, me. What's good for me? If I make money, even if I screw over my employees, my workers, whatever, it's good because I'm generating profit. Don't think about other people's, think about myself. Socialist ethics ethos throws that on its head, because again, the profit motive would be gotten rid of. There would be a centrally planned economy designed to meet the needs of the masses, as opposed to a capitalist system which is designed to make profit, and a very small capitalist class at the top does very well, while there's so much poverty, even though the material wealth is there. It's just being siphoned off by the capitalist class, and that that egotistical, that selfish nature is rewarded under a capitalist system, right? All human beings, whatever their position in society, are suffering from the process of deterioration, and that process of, I would also say, alienation that Marx talked about through working in a capitalist society where your labor is always going to be exploited. You become alienated from yourself. You become alienated from your coworkers. You become alienated from the natural world. Those are all very bad things, right? Unknowingly prisoners of their own egotism, they feel insecure, lonely, and deprived of the naive, simple, and unsophisticated enjoyment of life. Man can find meaning in life, short and perilous as it is, only through devoting himself to society. The economic anarchy of capitalist society as it exists today is, in my opinion, the real source of the evil. 100%. This was true in 1949 when Einstein wrote it. As true as it is now as I read this in 2021. We see before us a huge community of producers, the members of which are unceasingly striving to deprive each other of fruits of their collective labor, not by force, but on the whole in faithful compliance with legally established rules. In this respect, it is important to realize that the means of production, that is to say, the entire productive capacity that is needed for producing consumer goods, as well as additional capital goods, may legally be, and for the most part are, the private property of individuals. For the sake of simplicity, in the discussion that follows, I shall call workers all those who do not share in the ownership of the means of production. Again, the people who own the means of production, you usually call the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie. Although this does not quite correspond to the customary use of the term, the owner of the means of production is in a position to purchase the labor power of the worker, which they exploit, because the labor the worker generates this wealth, and then it's sucked away by the capitalist class who didn't do any of the work. Hence, that's why all workers, everybody who isn't a capitalist, is being exploited in a capitalist system. The owner of the means of production is in position to purchase the labor power of the worker. By using the means of production, the worker produces new goods which become the property of the capitalist. Central point about the process is the relation between what the worker produces and what he is paid. 100%. both measured in terms of value and so far as the labor contract is free. But again, like, it's all fucking bullshit. You got to work, you got to be able to make money in a capitalist society, or you literally starve and die. There's no such thing as a social safety net. But by his minimum needs and by the capitalist requirements for labor power in relation to the number of workers competing for jobs, it is important to understand that even the theory of payment of the worker is not determined by the value of his product. It's determined by what the capitalist is willing to pay, and that's always going to be the least amount possible, right? Because they want to increase their profit. Private capital tends to be concentrated in a few hands. We see that even more and more today. What is it, like I think it's 8 people, 8 billionaires have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population in the world. It's some disgusting figure like that. Partly because of competition among capitalists, and partly because technological development and the increasing division of labor encourages the formation of larger units of production at the expense of smaller ones. The result of these developments is an oligarchy of private capital, the enormous power of which cannot be effectively checked by even a democratically organized political society. This is true since the members of legislative bodies are selected by political parties largely financed or otherwise influenced by private capitalists. I mean, that's just a very apt description for the Republican and Democratic parties. Just a corporate duopoly, always ready and willing to do the bidding of the capitalist class, while the working class in the United States is just suffering immeasurably right now, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized, especially communities of color, people with disabilities, indigenous folks, LGBTQ folks, etc. The consequence is that the representatives of the people do not, in fact, sufficiently protect the interests of the underprivileged sections of population. Moreover, under existing conditions, private capitalists inevitably control, directly or indirectly, the main sources of info. Yes, 100%. What is it? 5 corporations control 90% of TV and radio in the United States. Yeah. So like there's no such thing as a free press in the United States. It is thus extremely difficult and indeed in most cases quite impossible for the individual citizen to come to objective conclusions and make intelligent use of his political rights. 100%, especially if you're if you're getting your news and analysis from mainstream outlets, whether it's liberal or conservative, right? Turn that shit off, right? Look at get your news from monthly review, Mint Press News, the Gray Zone, Breakthrough News. Who am I missing? Friends of Socialist China. I mean, there's a lot of good sources out there, independent left news, etc. Situation prevailing is an economy based on the private ownership of capital, is thus characterized by 2 main principles. First, means of production capital privately owned, and thus owners dispose of them as they see fit. Second, labor contract is, I would say in quotes, free. Of course, there's no such thing as pure capitalist society in this sense. In particular, it should be noted that the workers, the long and bitter political struggles, have succeeded in securing a somewhat improved form of free labor contract for certain categories of workers. But taken as a whole, the present-day economy does not differ much from pure capitalism. Production is carried on for profit, not for use. Again, that's a huge problem of capitalism, because it's not designed to meet the needs of people or the planet. Hence why in the United States we have billionaires becoming much richer during the pandemic, while tens of millions of people were out of work, while we've had 700 plus thousand people die. We still couldn't get universal health care because of the for-profit motive, and because the capitalist class completely controls the 2-party duopoly. There's no provision that all those able and willing to work will always be in a position to find unemployment. Army of the unemployed, I believe that was a Marx term, or Engels, right? Almost always exists. The work, and that's designed by capitalism. You can't have full employment. You need to have precarity. When you have an army of the unemployed, then you're able to drive down wages because people will be so desperate for jobs that they will more or less take anything, right? The worker is constantly in fear of losing his job, the precarity, as I mentioned. Since unemployed and poorly paid workers do not provide a profitable market, the production of consumer goods is restricted, and great hardship is a consequence. Technological progress frequently results in more unemployment rather than an easing the burden of work for 100%. I mean, just look, if technology had actually been used for the benefit of the people as opposed to the benefit of the corporations, of increasing profit motives to enrich the capitalist class further, we would all be working a lot less right now. We would all also be getting paid more for the work that we do, but the complete opposite has happened. This was correct in 1949. This is correct now. The profit motive, in conjunction with competition among capitalists, is responsible for an instability in the accumulation and utilization of capital, which leads to increasingly severe depressions. Unlimited competition leads to huge waste of labor and to that crippling of the social consciousness of individuals, which I mentioned before. The crippling of individuals I consider the worst evil of capitalism. Our whole educational system suffers from this evil. An exaggerated competitive attitude is inculcated into the student, who is trained to worship the acquisitive success as a preparation for his future career. I am convinced there's only one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely through the establishment of a socialist economy accompanied by an educational system which would be oriented toward social goals. In such an economy, the means of production are owned by society itself and utilized in a planned fashion. 100%. A planned economy, centrally planned economy that is rationally designed to benefit the masses, a dictatorship of the proletariat designed to benefit the working class, as opposed to an economy designed for the profit motive, which is what we have under capitalism. Planned economy, which adjusts production to the needs of the community, would distribute the work to be done among all those able to work, and would guarantee a livelihood to every man, woman, and child. Education of the individual, in addition to promoting his own innate abilities, would attempt to develop in him a sense of responsibility for his fellow men in place of the glorification of power and success in present society. Nevertheless, it is necessary to remember that a planned economy is not yet socialism. A planned economy, as such, may be accompanied by the complete enslavement of the individual. The achievement of socialism requires a solution of some extremely difficult socio-political problems. How is it possible, in the view of the far-reaching centralization of political and economic power, to prevent bureaucracy from becoming all-powerful and overweening? How can the rights of the individual be protected, and therewith a democratic counterweight to the power of bureaucracy be assured? So that's kind of the contradictions that Einstein is alluding to, that he thinks would need to be worked out to achieve socialism. Clarity about the aims and problems of socialism is of greatest significance in our age of transition. True in 1949 as is now, since under present circumstances, free and unhindered discussion of these problems has come under a powerful taboo. This was kind of getting close to kind of the Red Scare type of stuff, right? Consider the foundation of this magazine to be an important public service. Again, this was from the first issue of Monthly Review in May 1949. That was Albert Einstein on why socialism. I think he makes a pretty compelling case myself. And again, like, capitalism is the virus. All it cares about is increasing, the profit motive. Capitalism is a revolutionary force, as Karl Marx talked about, and it finds, all these ways in order to kind of shape shift and preserve itself. But now more than ever, we need to have a dictatorship of the proletariat. We need socialism in the United States. We need socialism all over the world. We need international solidarity with already established socialist revolutions, whether it be in Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, China, Vietnam, etc., etc. And we need to keep working and organizing and pointing out the contradictions of capitalism, both internally here in the imperial core in the United States and abroad, because it's literally a life or death matter for human species. We either overthrow capitalism, or life on this planet as we know it will frankly cease to exist sooner than later, because again, capitalism places the needs of profit above the needs of people and the planet. It's also a system based on infinite growth, with finite resources. Kind of problematic, especially given that climate change is this existential threat. Kind of important, right? Like the video. If you like the damn video, let me know what you thought of Einstein and his paper on why socialism. Peace. Much love. All part of the people.